Now, forces aligned with Libya's new unity government have continued to advance closer to an Islamic State group stronghold in the northern part of the country. The militias, mainly from the western town of Misrata, have been leading an offensive since early May to take full control over Sirte. At first, the militiamen rapidly advanced into the city, but their push got bogged down in recent days amid a series of suicide bombings by IS. IS fighters reportedly have anchored down at the militant group's headquarters in Sirte, the sprawling Ouagadougou Convention Center that was built by late dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Now, for some perspective on the situation in Libya, I'm joined by Jason Pack, the president of Libya-Analysis. Jason, welcome to Africa 54.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, one thing that sometimes, gets lost in people's minds is that the war or the fighting in Libya is not a very clear-cut fight between one group and another. Can you help us just sort this out?
Sure. We have a kind of civil war in Libya, which is a multipolar civil war. And maybe your viewers are more familiar with what's going on in Syria. It's not as if in Syria, the Assad regime fights the rebels. Obviously, the rebels are divided into the Islamic State and the Free Syrian Army and Jabhat al-Nusra. I would even say the situation in Libya is more complicated because there's no one government fighting against rebels, right? When the Gaddafi regime was overthrown, it was overthrown by not one uprising, but uprisings. There were civil society activists, but there were also Islamists. There were people from Misrata, but there were people from Benghazi. So imagine all of these uprisings struggling in the wake of Gaddafi's ouster to govern the country. Each one really only controls its own local area. So now to set the stage for what's going on now, you have in the east the House of Representatives, which is supporting General Haftar. And General Haftar was trained in some ways in the USA and has certain links to the CIA, but yet he's now an anti-American, and he gets his support from Russia and Egypt. And he's on the kind of anti-Islamist side. In the West, you have the UN-backed General National Accord, or GNA government, and those are the ones who have this advance against the Islamic State, which we heard are mostly Misratan fighters.
Yeah.
And breaking off from them are some Islamist groups who are not doing what they're supposed to in attacking the Islamic State, but they're trying to attack General Haftar. So you have at least 3 or 4 groups in this civil war.
In this theater, it looks like an impossible task to try and bring peace in that country. What is the best way forward?
Well, the best way forward would be to have a coalition against the common enemy. And you can think that there's that old saying, me and my brother against my cousin, but me and my cousin against the outsider. And I think the outsider here is ISIS. ISIS, although there are Libyans who are attached to it, it has foreign fighters. And Libyans have tended to react very negatively to Tunisian and Syrian fighters on their territory. I would hope that with better negotiations, maybe some Western facilitation, but not Western troops on the ground, we could get these different groups to work together against ISIS, and that's my strategy.
How much support is the unity government receiving from the other factions?
Not much. The unity government gets its support from the West and the UN, and it's based mostly in Western factions and these Misratan fighters. Sadly, it's made some political mistakes, which are so complex we can't get into them, but this has led to the fracturing of some of the hardline Islamist militias who would rather fight Haftar than fight the Islamic State. I would like to see incentives,
Like from the West?
Oh, yes, from the West, but also from guys on the ground. If you work together, you can get a piece of this pie. You can get money. You can get your own country back. Instead of penalties, what if we could give incentives and some penalties to get these factions to work together? Sadly, in the international arena, the Russians, the Egyptians, and the Emiratis seem to be giving incentives for not working together. They help Haftar to not work with the General National Accord government, and that's very destructive. And that's the analogy with Syria. We've never found a way, from when Clinton was Secretary of State to when Kerry was Secretary of State, to incentivize Russia to get their proxy to work together with other forces.
Wow. Jason, we have to call you back. Has to be a continuous conversation. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it'll be great to have you back here. Now, Jason Pack is the president of Libya-Analysis.